An enthusiastic welcome for a man who rarely travels. The armoured train drew into Beijing today and disgorged not only the North Korean leader but also his daughter. Kim Ju-ai is rarely seen in public and may be the designated heir, although she's only a teenager. The train was spotted approaching Beijing earlier. Known as the Moving Fortress, it proceeds at a sedate 37 miles per hour. The journey from the North Korean capital took nearly a full day. Unlike his boss, the North Korean public security minister flew, waved off from Pyongyang airport by Russian embassy officials, a sign of how close the two countries have become. Before he left to meet the Russian and Chinese leaders in Beijing, Kim Jong Un presided over a ceremony mourning North Korean soldiers who have given their lives for the cause being Russia's war in Ukraine. He consoled the families of men whom he had sent to fight alongside the Russian army, men, in other words, whom he had sent to their death. The quid pro quo? More and better armaments to boost North Korea's arsenal. China has long been North Korea's main patron, but links with Russia are now stronger than ever. President Putin, already in Beijing for yesterday's meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, spent the day with friends, including the Slovak leader, who, despite being an EU member, is sympathetic towards Russia.
We constantly see the pumping up of hysteria, claiming Russia plans to attack Europe. I think that sane people understand that this is a provocation or complete incompetence, because any sane person clearly understands that Russia has never had any intention of attacking anyone, has no such intention now, and will never have it.
Mr. Putin also took tea with his host and proclaimed forever friend, the Chinese leader, who has used the war in Ukraine as a way of splitting off the global south from the US and Europe. They walked and talked. The meetings and tomorrow's spectacle are to demonstrate an alternative global leadership, as President Trump imposes arbitrary tariffs and pulls America out of international bodies like the World Health Organization. Amongst the 26 foreign heads of state who will be in Beijing tomorrow, President Masoud Pezeshkian of Iran, the Zimbabwean leader Emerson Mnangagwa, and Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, who today brandished a Huawei phone that he said the Chinese leader had given him to avoid American hacking. Tomorrow's military parade will commemorate the defeat of Japan in 1945 as a Soviet and Chinese rather than an Allied victory. China lost an estimated 20 million people in the war, and the Soviet Union some 27 million, the majority civilians. 10 years ago, the Chinese held a parade to mark the 70th anniversary. Tomorrow, they'll show off a modernized and far more lethal army, a message to allies and rivals alike, as befits a superpower, projecting its economic and military might across the globe.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Well, joining me now is Henrietta Levin, a senior fellow in China Studies at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. She was formerly the director for China at the National Security Council in the White House. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. I mean, the imagery's already been powerful. We've seen Putin holding hands with India's Narendra Modi, the reclusive Kim Jong Un actually travelling to be by President Xi's side. But beyond the images, beyond the symbolism, is there substance to this?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And China has been trying to build an alternative world order that displaces U.S. leadership, starting in its region and reaching further afield for many years. But we see Beijing becoming much more confident in light of the summit in Tianjin, and I think we'll see more of that at the parade this week. We see China saying the quiet part out loud. President Xi announced a new global governance initiative that China is intended to lead at one of these SCO meetings. And so I do think that even, of course, the leaders at this summit announced a few tangible initiatives. They announced a new development financing bank that SCO will manage. But the real news here is about China's ability to rally support for this alternative vision of world order and for displacing U.S. leadership.
I mean, about that displacement of US leadership, how much is this because of Trump's rather erratic approach to foreign policy? Obviously, his, throwing out of tariffs on countries, his, this increasingly aggressive isolationism. Is this playing strategically poorly for US and in China's favor?
Well, look, China has been trying to build a world that is more friendly to its authoritarian political system, that will allow China to do whatever it wants to its neighbors, that will displace US leadership. That is not new. That is not created by Washington. But they're seeing much more success in that effort as a result of Washington's decision to abandon and disrespect some of its most critical partners, especially in China's neighborhood, when it comes to the US-India relationship, for example. We've seen just in the past few weeks an astonishing deterioration of a US-India partnership that's been built by Republicans and Democrats in Washington for decades. And so I think that the weakening of those ties does allow Beijing to really charge ahead with their long-standing project of world order.
So as President Trump withdraws from some of those spaces, China moves in?
I think that's right. The only way to effectively shape China's decision-making, in my view, if you're sitting in Washington, is to build strong partnerships, strong alliances, to build trust with the countries that matter in the Indo-Pacific and China's region. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that prioritized by the current administration. That does provide China with an important advantage. And you see it in the very warm tone of Prime Minister Modi's engagements with President Xi in Tianjin. Of course, the rapprochement in the China-India relationship does predate the Trump administration. India has its own reasons for seeking enhanced economic engagement with China. But we have to assume that the deterioration of US alliances and partnerships are accelerating some of these trends in ways that will be quite damaging for Washington's long-term interests.
And you talk about damage. How worried should Ukraine be at the lineup that we're seeing?
Yeah, Russia could not fight the war in Ukraine without systematic support from China in terms of economic support, financial support in evading US and European sanctions, and critical dual-use inputs to the Russian defense industrial base when it comes to things like machines tools and UAV parts, small things that have allowed the Russians to rebuild their military rapidly after taking battlefield losses. And so China is a critical element of the overall balance of forces in Ukraine. And I imagine for President Putin, in his engagements with Xi, making sure that he retains that support will be at the absolute top of his list of priorities. It's worth saying, though, China does not want to entirely burn its relationships in Western Europe. It has a goal of splitting the transatlantic alliance as well.
Henrietta Levin, I'm going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much for talking to us. Thank you.